having an open border. Right now, as you and I talk, we're a land of squatter camps. These people, they come to this country for a dream. They've got no dream. I go into the squatter camps, I talk to them. They live in a tin shanty, no showers for 10 years. They never will have a shower, in fact, as long as they live there. And they got no job. We got over 55% of people that don't have a job in this country. The fact that we're letting all these people come into our country to the detriment of our own people. And that will be the failure of South Africa unless we...
Guys, so Gary Player is actually adding his voice to this whole fight against illegal foreigners and undocumented foreigners in South Africa. The more and more I really try to follow this whole battle against illegal foreigners, it has always appeared that it's been black people, the black South Africans, really trying to fight against, other Africans, other black Africans, for example, from Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and all, and all that. But then here, Gary Player has a really interesting twist to the whole game, and you can see he's not what you would call a black South African, but he has South Africa at his heart. He's South African in heart. When you listen to him, you hear somebody who is a really fierce ambassador for South Africa. He speaks a lot about South Africa, where he has always been. He has built schools for black children in South Africa. So he's an embodiment of the whole South African ethos. And he has a really interesting perspective to this whole undocumented foreigners in South Africa and why, South Africa needs to be pure. And from his own perspective in that South Africa, and that is one thing that usually confuses me, because when the likes of the EFF speak about South Africans, they seem to be speaking about a different people. When the MK speaks about South Africa, they seem to be speaking of a different people, and the D and the like. So, but Gary Player here is actually speaking about how illegal foreigners and the whole, I think, the policy of the ANC that sort of had allowed the border open for different kinds of people to get into South Africa seems to be kind of like, from his own perspective, messing around with the culture of South Africa, and that South Africans or South Africa itself might eventually lose its culture. And from that perspective, he's really angry with this whole thing with undocumented foreigners. Let's listen quickly to what he really has to say. He has a really, really fierce message for the government and, for the whole idea, against the whole idea of illegal immigration. And I'll be back for some really interesting analysis on some Malawians that were deported from South Africa. But now, in terms of trying to negotiate life in Malawi, the only option had to be returning back to South Africa. Let's take a quick listen to Gary Player and I'll be back.
I love this country so much. I've represented South Africa way longer than anybody in the history of our country. 73 years I've been an ambassador. I brought people to this country to invest. I've been on television more than any South African. I've been appeared in front of people live way more than any South African. And this country means so much to me. I was offered $50 million to live in America and turned it down. Now here's the thing, and I see what's happening here perturbs me. Having an open border. And that's the other thing that Trump's going to do. He's going to stop these people just pouring in there, gangsters, people with diseases, spreading fentanyl and killing 200,000 young people coming in from China. He's going to stop all that. Now, my mind works so quickly and I get upset. But the thing is, when you have an open border, now we adopted a young black grandson, 2. And they say it's very hard to get a job, but other people coming in from other parts of the world can get a job. I'm all in favor of people coming into our country. Yes, as long as they do it legally with a proper visa and they can contribute to our great country. Yes, but having an open border, we must have let between 20 and 30 million people in. Now, I know we had people in exile during apartheid, but we never had more than 1 million. Let's say we had 2 million. Bring them in, give them a home, give them a job, do anything you like, and be reciprocal and be grateful and have gratitude for what they did for us. But don't let 20 or 30 million. We're a land, right now, as you and I talk, we're a land of squatter camps. These people, they come to this country for a dream. They've got no dream. I go into the squatter camps, I talk to them. They live in a tin shanty, no showers for 10 years. They never will have a shower, in fact, as long as they live there. It's ice cold in the winter, and it's boiling hot living in that corrugated iron in the summer. And they got no job. We got over 55% of people that don't have a job in this country. The fact that we're letting all these people come into our country to the detriment of our own people. And that will be the failure of South Africa unless we stop it. You cannot share a loaf of bread amongst 50 people. And we owe it to our people to give them a big education, to get out of a debt. How do we get rid of our debt? How do we survive when you've got an overpopulation and not sufficient income coming in? So this is, for me, the crucial thing. This determines, in my humble opinion, whether South Africa has a future or not, if we're going to do something about this. And thank goodness. And what is happening? All the cultures of the world are being ruined. France is finished. France is no Frenchman's country. France, their culture is gone. Entirely gone in 20 years. Germany's culture now. Mrs. Merkel will go down in history as one of the worst leaders Germany ever had. She let in 1 million Syrians, but nothing against the Syrians, into her country. And it's changing her culture. And this is what's happening in England. There will be no more England in 55 years. Now you go to the Middle East, they're proud of their culture. You can't go there and build a Christian church. You can't go there and get it and marry one of their women. So we've got to look after our cultures. It's not a case of being racialistic, not liking people. I love everybody. My life is full of love. I have respect for their religions. I don't like being called an infidel because I've got respect for their religion. I don't want to be called an infidel, but so be it. So the thing is, you've got to look after your culture. Holland is on its way out. Germany is on its way out. And Trump is going to stop that. And you can't, I go to the Middle East and I work there and I build golf courses and I talk to the sheiks and I talk to people. They say, no, we don't want to change our culture. We're Muslims and we want to remain Muslims. And so we should have the right to remain Christians and to live in our culture. Now, South Africa will never lose its culture. China will never lose its culture. America, as long as Donald Trump is to say, won't lose their culture. But the rest of the world, well, North Korea won't. Iran certainly won't. But I can tell you, in the West, it's a sad, sad thing to see. So what I'm saying, in short, we can't have an open border and let people just pour in. Drugs, when I was a young man in South Africa, there was very, very little drug. Now we're inundated with drugs. We're the second highest. We're catching up to Nigeria. It's going to affect your children. And everybody who's listening to me today, it's going to affect their children. So we've got to have law and order, and you can't have law and order when you have an overpopulation of other nations in your country.
Yeah, brilliant, guys. So we'll just quickly get into the report. It's a really complex problem with illegal foreigners, undocumented foreigners and all that. But I think a country has to do what it has to do to really kind of like protect its own people and put South Africa, its citizens first. In this case, it's South Africa. But anyway, I found this really interesting article on The Guardian that spoke about the plight of some deported Malawians who, couldn't find any other way to live when they went back to their home countries other than trying to find a way back to South Africa after living in South Africa as undocumented foreigner. The title says, I Can't Survive. Malawians hit hard by South Africa's crackdown on illegal migration. It says many of those who sought work in South Africa have been deported to a country in dire financial straits. Okay, so it says that there's a guy here now, his name is Collins Kamoto. He was heading out for a drink with a friend on one Sunday evening in a small gold mining town of Nigel. And usually I think this whole thing with gold mining is part of the whole thing with the Zamas that sort of like attracts the whole Zimbabweans, Mozambicans and all that. I think it's also something about the Malawians as well. So they end up sort of like trying to live in these towns where gold mining actually takes place. So he said he was hanging with a friend at a gold mining town of Nigel, southeast Johannesburg, when they were stopped by the police and they were arrested. 1 month later, this 46-year-old Collins Kamoto, who had actually been in South Africa since 2023, was charged with not having proper documentation. And then in September, after 4 months in jail, he was deported back to Malawi, which is part of what many of his compatriots believe is a crackdown by South Africa's authorities on immigrants working in South Africa illegally. So now, in Malawi, here he says, my life is miserable because even when I'm working here, it is not enough to help my family. That's what he said in his village in Kampala, in his village of Kampala in Mulanje, which is a border district, a district bordering Mozambique in Malawi southeast. Okay, so now let's tackle this problem. He said Kamoto, who has 3 children and 1 grandchild, child, left Malawi to look for work after losing his job and seeing his friends in South Africa doing well. So in other words, South Africa seems to be this kind of like safe haven for many of the other countries around that region. South Africa, and this is something that probably we need to investigate, because what is it that is in South Africa that makes it kind of like feel like a place where, when you travel, you end up doing well in life, or probably you have to travel to South Africa for greener pastures. What then is it? For me personally, I would argue that it's the liberalist business ethos that sort of like strives to, produce and engage in production that then opens doors for multiple avenues to employ people and give people work. So in other words, this whole idea with a productionist ethos, so to speak, I think is what drives South Africa. And South Africa, we know, has some really fine capitalists, some fine business people and all that. And so I think this is one argument from my perspective anyway, but I can be corrected. But anyway, he said, according to him now, when he now came to South Africa after hearing that his friends were doing well in South Africa and losing his job in Malawi, he came to South Africa, and then life in South Africa became hard. Life turned hard, he said. He lived in a metal-walled shack with no running water, doing occasional difficult work, feeding farm animals or working in fields, and was paid 100 to 350 rand a day. Now, but even though he could go for days without a job, Kamoto said it would have been worth it. According to him, he said, when I went to South Africa, I was getting enough to support my relatives. So it's crazy that even with 100 to 300 rand salary that comes not even as often as possible, he was still able to get enough to feed. You can imagine the kind of difficulties it must, such societies in other countries, probably like Malawi and Mozambique, actually are going through because of probably a lack of job, lack of unemployment. It's really pathetic. And this is what's putting pressure on South Africa, and South Africans are complaining that foreigners are beginning to come in to take the jobs that South Africans should actually be doing, because they come in hungry. These foreigners come in hungry, ready to work, ready to survive, because they know they leave a family at home, and that hunger and that thing makes it feel like they're taking all the jobs, and it's then becoming overwhelming for many South Africans. So this is the problem I'm beginning to really understand with this whole fight against illegal foreigners in South Africa. So it says that South Africa has a history of importing migrant labor, especially to work in the mines. In recent years, poverty and political unrest have contributed to migration in the country. He said that there are about 2.4 million foreign-born people in South Africa out of a population of 62 million, according to the statistics census of 2022. And it aimed to count people regardless of their immigration status, all right? Now, almost half of that 2.4 million foreign-born people in South Africa, almost half are Zimbabweans, followed by Mozambicans, followed by people from Lesotho, and then there are 200,000 Malawians, according to the 2002 census. Now, however, it says that the struggles of South Africans, which is the fact that more than 4 in 10 are out of work. Today, we translate it as a 33.4% unemployment rate in South Africa. It's in practical terms, 4 out of 10 people in South Africa do not have a job. Many of you have seen in the comments argue that that might even be more, okay? But because of this level of high unemployment, it has fueled xenophobia, naturally, okay? I was listening to advocate, what's his name now? He's one of the judges that was sent to the International Court of Justice to fight the case against Israel on Palestine, all right? And he was speaking at London School of Economics, LSE, on law, and he spoke about how, one thing that South Africa missed probably at the transition from the National Party all the way to the era of democracy in 1994 was that they missed the structural question, all right? So even though there was a political transition that sort of like gave political independence, the structural economic structures then still remain the same. And it's that structure now that seems to be permeating and increasing, the conditions for financial exclusion, for economic exclusion, and economic, insecurity, economic inequality, as it were. So I think this is actually one way to understand the reason why xenophobia in itself, according to him, isn't necessarily just born out of the fall. It is as a result or an effect of an economic inequality that seems to be hitting hard on a larger majority in South Africa, and then that whole effect is then taken on a group of people, to which we now call xenophobia. All right. So he said because more than 4 in 10 are out of work, xenophobia has been fueled against other Africans, which then periodically erupts in anti-immigration violence. Now, it says that in South Africa, you always look left and right and usually meet with the sound of sirens, says this Collins Kamoto, all right? As an illegal foreigner, this is the life of an illegal foreigner. You always have to look left and right, always on the watch out for sirens, all right? And he spoke about his unsuccessful attempts to evade police, which then led him to being among the 205 Malawians who were deported from South Africa in 4 busloads as at the time he was deported. Now, it says that South African police had been mounting roadblocks and searching shacks and block of flats, as we could see with even Senzum Kunu in his regime now, where they suspect illegal immigrants are living, and something that did not used to happen, all right, said another Malawian in his 30s who had been deported several times and did not want to be named. So in other words, this whole problem, I think I made a video on that, yes, Vuyo Zungula, he argued that the deportation of these guys, Malawians, Mozambicans and all that, is redundant, because you might deport them on Friday and by Monday morning they are back into the country. And so there are multiple immigrants who are deported continuously. This guy now has been deported he says he has been deported several times, all right? So this is one problem that probably Home Office need to really find a strategic way to now really work on. So it said that in recent years anyway, Malawi has then faced a collapsing currency, soaring inflation, and shortages of imported fuel, medicines, and food. And in 2022, 89% of Malawians said that the country of 20 million was going in a wrong direction, all right? Now, this is according to an Afrobarometer statistics. Afrobarometer is a kind of like a portal that does statistics for across the African continent. So it said that the economic condition, which is dire in Malawi, and then lack of formal jobs, and then poverty, and especially a GDP per capita of $645 in 2002, pushed many Malawians to leave. Now, remittances from Malawians working abroad have more than trebled in the last decade as a proportion of Malawi's GDP to 1.3%, all right? So there's been remittances from these guys abroad, and they've been supporting the Malawian economy. Anyway, it goes then now to say that South Africa remains the preferred destination for most of these, migrant flows. We do not have figures for Malawians being deported back, but anecdotally, there seems to be an increase driven by the evolving policy direction of the South African government on migration. So, finally, anyway, it says here that, South Africa's Home Affairs Minister Leon Schreiber said, recently that weeks after joining the cabinet in May, that operation to crack down on illegal immigration would increase. So in other words, Leon Schreiber's approach is to continuously crack down on illegal immigration, to continuously deport illegal foreigners. But the only problem I have is that, if the ways in which the borders are open aren't really dealt with, then this whole deportation with taxpayers' money and all that, I don't know, might end up being redundant. But that's something that probably I know they've been thinking about in Home Office. So at the end of the day, anyway, my conclusion with this whole case, with this whole matter is, I think we have to slowly start understanding the structural inequalities that make certain nations thrive above others. But also, it's important to remember that the value itself of the people and the individuals living in a particular nation can actually help a nation thrive. In other words, I've come to really start understanding that, a productive ethos, export-led growth and all that seem to be a way that the country can really grow in a way productively, sustainably, with the people within that space, having sort of like ability to get jobs, especially the middle class. Because at the end of the day, if there aren't really businesses growing, if small business is not supported, if there aren't ways in which entrepreneurs can grow and then be able to open windows to give employment to people, there would always be complaints of unemployment, graduates flocking the streets every single year and coming to meet really violent spaces and the streets without jobs and all that, old white, black, Indian, coloreds, and that whole thing just keeps on increasing the whole problem with xenophobia and all that. And it's so unfortunate that now that the victims of this whole deportation then become these guys who see South Africa as the light and wish to work in South Africa for a better living, they then become the victims of this suppressed anger, so to speak, as a result of the structural inequalities that have framed South Africa's post-independence, dispensation, as it were. So at the end of the day, it appears that, somehow the entrepreneurial spirit, the entrepreneurial drive of South Africa has to get more into full swing to provide jobs and all that. But then with policies like BEE, with policies like other, as I see you guys complain in the comments, many of the business guys in South Africa are leaving. Many people, many productive minds and talents are leaving South Africa, leaving the whole space flooded with what might end up being dependence on a system that isn't productive enough to hold them or sustain them on the long run. So this is a really difficult problem to tackle, and hopefully South Africa can have a kind of like a leader rise to the fore who understands the intricacies, complexities of this problem and have really workable solutions to help South Africans and South Africa really rise back to its, as it were, former days of glory. But anyway, I don't know. This is how far I'll go with this video. What do you think about Gary Player's speech? His perspective to illegal immigration and all. Share your thoughts in the comments.